etiquette overseas is dramatically important because it really plays to the issue of culture. And culture is a very determining factor in any negotiations, in any planning, in any execution of business activities. And therefore, anyone who travels internationally, be it for business and even for pleasure, needs to be aware of cultural imperatives. The United States time for us is terribly important. We preserve it, we save it, we are on time. Those are very important concepts. But you look at the same thing internationally, and people see time more as an incidental, that if you say you meet in the afternoon, you may say you meet around 4, but that becomes 4-ish and may become 6-ish quite quickly. And nobody's upset at all because that's just how it is. But getting ready for that and living with that expectation that not everything will flow as smoothly and as precisely as one may be used to, that's something difficult. Formality often matters. In some countries, people are addressed in different ways depending on their social status. And there can be, let's say in Spanish-speaking area, there can be the tú versus the usted. In French-speaking areas, the tu versus the vous. In German areas, the du versus the sie. And it's very sensitive to decide what form of address to use, because if you use the wrong one, you may generate ill will. And I remember talking to an executive in Europe who told me that for him the biggest problem was, and he was an American executive, when he came to Europe he had to remember how he was going to address the presidents of his subsidiaries. One was called Huang, the other one was called Dr. Meyer, and the next one was called John Miller, and he really had to stick with that. It couldn't be all first name only because it just didn't work that way. But you also have other formality issues. For example, I remember going with a group of Americans into a German restaurant, and they didn't have any air conditioning, so we all took off our jackets. And our German hosts were obviously appalled at that. And I tried to make for some easier feelings, and I said to the German co-host, look at the gentlemen over there in the corner, they all have taken off their jacket. Whereupon he turned to me and he asked, and what makes you think these are gentlemen? And that sort of cleared the air at least. Not necessarily a question of sensitivity, it's a question of outcome, even with good sensitivity. 2 examples come to mind. One was where President Bush was in Germany at a leader meeting, and Chancellor Merkel of Germany obviously looked a little bit exhausted, and he stepped up from behind and started giving her a back rub. And that somehow didn't go so well because German chancellors don't often get back rubs in public. Or other situations where national leaders, for example, don't like to be touched by anyone. And even if that touch is to convey empathy and closeness and friendship, they're still not used to being touched. And it shows in their faces. But we've also had, on the positive side, again, President Bush, who in the White House Rose Garden welcomed some Arab leaders. And while they were walking in the Rose Garden, they shook hands and then they held hands for the next 10 minutes of walking, which is not necessarily the most American of behaviors, but it clearly demonstrated to the visitors that he had sort of read up on the culture and tried to do things their way, and that was very welcome and was appreciated internationally. You know, really, it's not just the rules, because they can be learned. but it's really the empathy, the conveying that I come in friendship, I'm here to know you as a person and work with you. I'm not just here to do the transaction and be out of here again. It does make sense to look at some of these guidebooks. It makes sense to go, for example, to the US Department of State website, which tells you roughly what to do, or at least what to avoid. There's also, lo and behold, by the Central Intelligence Agency, there's a World Fact Book, which summarizes each country economically, politically, and it's available to the public. It can even also be seen on the internet. And it teaches you sort of the most important things not to do and the most important things to keep in mind, so that you don't go and provide a gift that you think is very wonderful and your guests may think is a terrible thing to do, because knives or clocks or certain colors are just not welcome in that society. And so you can avoid some of those mistakes. But of course, there's also a lot of slack being given to Americans, sort of, yeah, they probably don't know, so we still get the benefit of the doubt.